Hi, gang. Hello, hello.
Hi.
We're going to get all the folks that aren't going to be in Tucson this week.
No, unfortunately.
Yeah,
It's okay.
best for my wallet.
Yeah, that's
But I got to say, I'm realizing how many people I know who are there this week who are giving all kinds of updates that I'm envious of.
yeah, I'm following also a lot of people. So the best way to look at it is now you have good information on the vendors for next year. Have you ever been to Lapidary Dave's channel?
Nope. Lapidary Dave.
Yeah, Lapidary Dave is D-A-V-E.
Okay.
Great. He goes to different booths and then he puts a camera on the names and it's very informative
Gotcha. Okay.
on YouTube.
Hi, gang. Welcome, welcome. Gonna get a lot of the usual crew, it looks like. Good to see you all. Happy February already.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know
know.
how that happened.
Terrible.
Hi, everyone.
Oops, we lost somebody. No, we just got a couple more people. All right. So we are starting the home stretch at this point, gang. So a whole boatload of the usual tidbits. That there's some classes scheduled for this year. I am going to pop the usual links up in case anyone has missed them in prior sessions. And for just this group, I have kept the coupon code for registering for classes open until 10 a.m. Pacific time on the 2nd. So tomorrow you have one more day if you have wanted to register and use that 15% off code for any of the classes except the waxworking. They're only for my virtual ones, not the ones that are hosted. And here is the code. A few of you have already taken advantage of it. Oops, PST. Make sure that says the right thing. So there is the Zoomers 23 code that will get you a 15% discount if you'd like to register by tomorrow for any of my 3 online workshops. And the usual, this is the code for Rio, in case you need it. Rio for schools, which will get you 6 months of wholesale pricing, basically.
What if you are a Rio Pro? Do they still give you a discount?
So they don't give you any further discount. Rio Pro is as good as it gets until you start buying Rio. There's like Rio Pro levels if you buy serious stuff, but these coupons don't, or the codes don't help expand from the basic Rio Pro. However, it does help them support the teachers. So you can put your code on it for me anyhow, and they'll know that you're one of my students. And there are things that I can do if I have a class that I have a very specific toolkit for and so on. I can give them a list of their part numbers and they can put together a special. Here's if you want to order the whole Rachel packet and things like that. So it's not a huge big perk, but it does help all of us a little bit further. And Rio is really good about supporting educational programming, so I like to support them back. Okay, so we have a lot of tidbits to catch up on before doing the final setting in chapter 4. Some of the tidbits will start out with, I've moved my cameras around because the rest of these settings are all close-up settings that we're going to be working on. So we'll see if this helps, but it means I'm going to be playing a little bit. Here is the magical board, which is getting fuller by the day. And I wanted to catch us up on a few of the things that we haven't really looked at because I didn't get them finished during session. Obviously, there's still some gaps that will be refilled. But a couple of discoveries I've had, and I'm going to zoom in a little closer, so bear with me.
Rachel, I think you have to pin yourself.
Spotlight, yep, thank you. And spotlight for everyone. That's what I need. Well, got much bigger. Okay. So one of the things that I was fighting was I did not like the effects I was getting on my basic crown setting. And what I realized is I just didn't like the proportions. And so it was getting frustrating to get it looking clean. As soon as because I'm working on such big stones so that you guys can see them whenever possible, the 4 prongs was just an awful proportion. It looked like these wide gaps. So as soon as I moved to 6 prongs, I got a lot happier with the results I was getting. And it just looks a little cleaner and more elegant. And this is going to have, this is the same stone I think I was working with at the time we were running this, but maybe not. So it's just going to have a simple, clean look to it on the basics. So sometimes it's about looking at what is it that's frustrating you about the setting. If it's not looking the way you want, it's not always am I doing it wrong? Sometimes it's have I made the right choices on a design perspective. And so this looks a lot better to me now that I've got 6 prongs. And I think if I were on a much smaller stone, I'd be okay with the 4 prongs, but I would say probably not until I get down to a size like 4 millimeter stone. And then I also wanted to redo my attempts at the detailed, oops, I got to get that into this right side of the screen. Where am I going? Forward. There we go. So this is one of those versions where we cut off the bottom and do some extra detailing. For this, I also put a jump ring that I'd slightly flattened in between the 2 layers. Because I wanted, it was such a tiny little amount of detail. I wanted something to emphasize it. Let me see if I can get you guys in any closer on that. Ooh, my goodness, is that going to focus? No, that's too close. Come on, focus for us. There we go. So again, all I did was cut off the bottom half. Once I'd gotten my upper carvings in, I cut off the bottom third actually, and did some filing down to that. And then between the 2 layers, I flattened out that jump ring just the right size to give a little emphasis to it. So that was an upgrade from what I had been getting. I like the clean look a little bit better. Again, 6 prongs for this size stone. And when we put the stone in, it's going to be, oops, I'm out of frame. So it'll be a nice little bling addition to that stone. One of the other things I realized was that I was having real challenges doing this exclusively with saw and files. And in some of these, I've been playing with some of the high quality bush finishing burrs, which can go slowly enough that I can get a clean, controlled cut in it. So I'd go back and forth. I'd first start marking it out with a saw to get all my mark points. And then I'd work down those with a barrel burr to get a cut in divot. And then I'd clean it up with files.
Are those the same thing as a cylinder burr?
Cylinder burr, yeah, barrel burr,
Okay.
cylinder burr. Yep. And then some of it I would get, excuse me, I would get in and do some details with a flame burr to just clean my angles a little bit. And then I came back through and used sanding discs to really clean up all my corners and edges and so on. So I did the top half, cut it off, did the same thing to the bottom half as if it was just a baby version of the larger piece, and then soldered things back together once they were cleaned up. Questions on that one? Keep going out of frame. Okay. That one back. And what was the other one that I wanted to show some discovery on?
I have a question on that one.
Yeah.
So,
I have a question too.
so it was 2 parts, and then you soldered it with the ring there to put them
Yeah.
together?
Yep. So it was, I built the whole thing at first. So the whole cone,
Okay.
right? And then I put in my cut marks. I did measurements, so I knew how much I was going to take away, that bottom third. I did all my measurements. I cut in my top edges. Then I sawed carefully down the middle and took this section off, the lower third, cut those sections in. So I did all the filing and cutting that I needed to on the details there. So I had a separate little chunk of it set aside. But in order to get it nice and clean, I didn't like how it was fitting going back onto just by itself onto this piece. It felt a little small for it. So I opted to get a jump ring that was one that I could rest this little piece on. Sorry, I keep going out of frame. I'm getting used to this detail camera over here. Let's see if I can get a pointer so I can not get my hands in the way when we're this close. So this section, I soldered upside down. I just rested it on the flattened jump ring and soldered it to the jump ring. And then I soldered the pair of them back down to the original top half of the piece.
Okay.
But the question
Okay.
for me is, why would you do that?
Decorative, purely decorative.
Ah, okay.
I just like that extra, like, so look at the difference between the two styles. We've got your basic one,
Mhm.
and then we've got your glitzy one. Oop,
I like
keep
the
going up.
glitzy one. I
Okay.
think you should show
I
us the
see.
glitzy one.
Just a little fancier,
Yeah.
right? And there's
Yeah,
lots
I
of
see it.
variations that you could do on that. Okay, somebody else have a question? Wendy, did you say you had one?
I did. I've learned so much about cylinder burrs this week, that there's single cut and double cut and Kraus and fine ones from Contente. And oh my gosh,
Yeah,
what cylinder burr did you use?
I used they're called Bush finishing burrs.
Okay.
It's a specific series of theirs that are like ultra fine teeth, ultra high quality steel.
And from whom did you?
Oh, it was either Auto Fry or it was, I think it must have been Auto Fry. Hang on a sec. Let me see if I can figure it out. Yep, Auto Fry.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm so
And
sorry.
there's multiple collections of bush burrs and they're all good quality. These were ones that somebody on one of my Facebook groups pointed out as something that they specifically use for like inside of cleaning up bezels to the last, you know, it sort of gives a sand slash not quite polish, but clean cut rather than the toothier cut. A lot of barrel or cylinder burrs are very coarse and they jump around like crazy. So yeah, that's what I used. Did that answer? Did we lose Wendy? I think we may have lost Wendy. Yep, maybe she'll pop back on. Okay, any other questions on this one before I move on to some other things?
I just want to know that little detail
Yeah.
in between the prongs that you did with the file, right?
So a
on the
combination of
top.
burrs and files, yep.
Ah, okay.
So remember that I'm not doing it while it's attached. Like there's no, I don't have small enough files to get in those little holes. So
Right.
it's slicing off that bottom section. John describes it in his book, and I tried to do one on screen, but I wasn't liking the effect I was getting. It just was too coarse looking. So I've gone back and done one that I'm happier with, and that's what you're seeing here.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing it in the book. Okay, thank you.
Yep. And you can do more proportion, less proportion. You can do you can, like, I didn't have to put all of my cutaways going the same upward direction. You can do drill holes. So if you have to, don't drop it, you could drill holes as part of your pattern instead of,
Right.
you know, any number of things that you can do decoratively to enhance the
Yeah.
basic bezel.
I'm looking at it right now.
Okay. Any others on that?
It's a great
Alright.
example. Thanks for sharing. And your camera's
Sure.
great.
For sure. Okay, and I think we finished the setting of the.
Oh, but nobody saw my setting. Can you put it in the camera so I can show it?
You finished a card setting? Sure. Hang on a sec. Let me spotlight you if I can
It's
get my.
not finish. I need to solder it. and do the, cut the little thin pieces of metal just to secure the stone,
Yep.
but I don't know what to do with it.
Well, we can talk about ideas during the end session where we go through everything, but let's see what you got.
Okay.
Oh, nice. Look at that. Bring it a little bit more center to your, there we go. What a pretty stone too.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
Very
that's
cool.
I love it. That's cool.
And you made a nice heavy gauge. I like it.
Yes, I remember you saying the heavier, look how pretty it looks if it's a heavier gauge.
Yep. It's really a strong piece.
Uh-huh.
Okay, bring it out again at show and tell
Okay.
section, and we'll talk about,
All right, thank you.
yeah. Okay, back to spotlight. So let me think. I feel like I had one other stone that I wanted to bring up, but maybe I'm wrong. Oh, yeah, well, of course, the big thing is last week's stones, and Wendy's not back on, so she wanted to see my conical device, the tool that I was using. Oh, and here are, get to the right spot. Bing, come back here. Oh my goodness, my left right is all backwards on this camera. Okay, yeah, we're almost in screen. Oh, phooey. I'm gonna back out a little bit just so we can get to it.
Elena sent me her.
Okay, so here is one of the settings, one of the stones from the last session where we did the multi-jig. And here is an example of what we're gonna do in this session with the square tubing. This teeny tiny little thing. Let me see if I can get my zoom right where I need it. Ooey. There, almost. There we go. See that teeny tiny little setting? That's our square setting. And this is one of our settings from the last session. So with that in mind, let me bring out some tidbits from that. And I gotta zoom a little further back out. Yep, sorry guys. Apologies for any dizzy making. So I may have convinced myself I like this multi-jig thing a little more than I did when we were on class. I was getting frustrated at the amount of work for it. But so we had done a brand new one, and I had not added that little addition that I've been talking about. So John just has the basics and has us strap them together. I went back and played around with the one that I had made that was slightly smaller, which helped, and that has that little bit of support for when I'm threading things. And it made a huge difference for stability. I'm still not using binding wire because I don't have thin enough binding wire, and I haven't had a chance to run out and grab some. But in doing that, I was able to do really long stretches of them. I think this represents either 2 or 3 batches done on the smaller jig. And once you get well positioned without mangling it, and you get the routine of just doing a whole row of soldering, and then you rotate and do the next side, and then you rotate and do the next side, and so on, it actually goes much faster than I anticipated. So I'm getting a little bit hooked on this, and I think at some point I'm going to want to try making a 6-prong jig, which will be much more interesting to me, or maybe a 3-prong jig, and see how that works. But you get some pretty good quick and dirty, put them out in consistent looks. And I was reminded when I pulled a whole bunch of them out that this is one of the ways that you can make tennis bracelets. So we add on some side connectors, some hinge connectors, and boom, you've got a good tennis bracelet made from that. Add a clasp and you're good to go. So I'm maybe a little bit happier about them after having done a bunch more. Isn't that always the way? Practice helps, it really does. But today I want to set a couple of these so that you can see the steps I would take for that. And ideally, of course, we're going to use tubing that is a perfect fit for what we're setting. Where did I put my stones? I had a nice little packet of stones waiting for me. Oh, there they are. Okay.
So Rachel,
Yep.
Did you do a new one that made you happier or what?
So I had made one before we met that I remember I talked about the fact that I was being frustrated by the basic jig and getting all the lines straightened out. So something I had tried on my own time, not on screen, was to solder down a small chunk of tubing of the right size at one end of it so that it acts as a guide for it. Oh, and the other thing, I wish Wendy was back on because I wanted to thank her for it. Wendy had said at one point, why don't you put wax on the end? Because I didn't have the right binding wire. I didn't like how wax burned off as I was going, but I remembered I have my Wolf Tools Wolf Clay, which I can get in screen, maybe. Let me zoom a little further out. The camera is on the other side from where it was on my other desk, so I'm doing everything backwards. If you haven't played around with Wolf Clay, it's Kate Wolf. And it's just a putty that you can use to position things. There's several other brands on the market. This was just the earliest I was introduced to. It does not protect from heat, so it's not one of those stone protector things, but you can take it, unless it's too scorched at the end, you can take it and add water and reconstitute it. So I like it for that. So what I would do is each time I'd run the wires, I would just put a little chunk of it over the wires at the end, just for long enough to get my solder positioning held. And that worked really nicely. It was an idea inspired by the idea of putting wax on the end of it. And this doesn't burn off the way that the wax does and drip all over your block and then keep burning for weeks later. Ask me how I know. So that combination of better support and having the bracing of the tube, plus I think the size that I did on the first pass was a little bit bigger stone. I think I did 6 millimeter, and I think these are like 4 or 4.5 millimeter, somewhere in there. Smaller made it a lot easier to control. I'm not saying it was perfect. There were a couple of times when I would melt the wire in a section and it would sag, and I'd have to pause and reposition, and I'd lose one that I'd made out of the set, that kind of thing. But once you get sort of the how to get them connected without a lot of torquing and twisting, and then getting them locked in, and it's the super most critical thing is that these holes be right at the wall of the tubing, right? As soon as you have any gapping, you're going to fight it the entire way. That's probably why John wants us using the binding wire, but until and unless I can find thin enough binding wire, that was just getting in my way. So that's my take on
Rachel.
Yep.
That clay, the piece that you use,
Yep.
did you put it right back into the original, that container? Or
So
do
I
you
don't
keep
put it
it
back
separate?
into the container because it does get a combination of charred and not charred. So I have a little bucket beside my my bench that I'm just tossing the scraps into. And when I get enough, I sort of peel away the darkest bits of the char and then add a little water and reconstitute it. It will work 2 or 3 times to reconstitute. So it's not a like put it back and you get to use it forever. It's just it doesn't have to die every time you do it.
Thanks.
Yeah. And again, there's other brands out there. And I think John mentioned at one point that the base of all of them is actually a plumbing tool. Like there is an equivalent to this that plumbers use to hold pipes in place, but I can't for the life of me find the right pile of hundreds of pages of handwritten notes I have from him that that tells me what the material was that he was recommending. So this is good stuff. Like any of the set your material work, if you're messy about it, it gets in the way of soldering. That's kind of part of it. It doesn't work quite the same as a like a whiteout or a stop flow or anything like that, but it is a little bit greasy and a little bit invasive to your soldering process. So that's one of the reasons I avoid using those placeholders whenever possible. But in this case, it was perfect because it was outside of my soldering zone on the outside ends of the connectors here. So I just started on the end that has the little knob on it and then put the squishy bit so it was held in place, threaded all my stuff in and ran to the other end. And I frankly found it was easier the more I had in between. Like if I tried to make really tall, gappy sections between the prongs, that was where they would warp the most. So I really planned out how close I could get to each other. So these are sort of the distances. I left a few of them untrimmed. I was trying to get them sort of those kinds of proximity. Oh, that's not a good angle for you guys to see. Let me see if I can angle that at all. I don't know if that's showing about how close I had them. I just needed enough to cover my stones and have a little bit of room to file and adjust the setting size shapes. So, questions
seems
before I
like
get
a
into
great-
setting a couple of these?
That seems like great setup once you get it going. I mean, they look
Yeah, there's
fantastic.
an appeal to it if you're doing a lot of the same size stone. The challenge is you have to make one of these for every size stone and tubing combo that you want, and for every number of prongs that you want. It's not, I mean, I suppose maybe you could use a 6 as a 6 or a 3, and potentially you could use a 4 as a 4 or a 2. But it's going to get a little crowded in there if you put too many holes in, and I don't know. It's worth playing around with. Okay, so let's talk about some of the steps in setting these. One of the things we get by using manufactured tubing is that it's of a certain size, and these faceted citrines that I designed the tubing for are not well calibrated. I know that out of the gate. That means that some of my stones will be a little too big for the seat, and some of them will be just right or need to set down a little bit. So what I found is, because we've got the luxury of the heavy walled tubing, even if they're too small for it, I mean, if they're not so small that they fall through, but no matter what size, they benefited from cutting in with a setting burr into the center. And the difference in how much you're cutting in is, if it's smaller than the outer diameter of the tubing, then you just cut in enough for it to sort of rest on top. And if it's at the size so that it's really sitting on top of the tubing, you want something that is going to simultaneously cut a seat and cut us a little bit. Where's my little pointer that I had a moment ago? Cut us a little bit in right where we are going to hit the edge of the stone, right? Just like we would have done on any of our prong setting things before, where we're having to file or cut in. That said, if you're doing it for cabs, which these could sit cabs as well, then you don't need to cut into the prongs at all. You can just rest it on top. You don't even need to cut into, you wouldn't want to cut into the tubing. So this is really a step that I'll take only for faceted on this. And I'm still going to measure my stones, even though I happen to have played around with a bunch of these. I'm going to see if I can find a big one and a little one to see if I can get the range. Oops, I've got a few of these that I've already cut in, so those will keep out of the way. So, and then let's see if I have a really small one. Really small. Okay, let me set the rest aside so we can see the range that we're hitting with this particular batch. In theory, they are all 5 millimeters. In practice, we'll find out. I'm a huge fan of decorative additional stones, not necessarily being super pricey. They can add a little bling without really devastating your budget. And so I often buy knowing they're not fully calibrated. Let me see if I can get us a little bit better positioned for you guys to see these. So I'm trying to give you a sense of the difference in how they sit before they've been cut. Is that showing a side view at all for you guys? Can you see that this one is sitting on top of the wall, and this one, you can see a little bit of the wall showing beyond. So this one's a little too small, and this one's the biggest size, right? So they both benefit from cutting in. if we look at them from the side, let me see if I can hold them with my wax or something so you can see how much lifted this piece is. So you see how much is resting above the edge of the tube on that one. That's the big one. Whereas the little one probably could get away with no cutting in because it is small enough that it just sits there right at the top, right? So this one I could probably get away with no cutting in if I wanted to, but it just means I'm going to do, in this case, I'm going to do a tiny bit of cutting in just for stability to follow the angle of the stone, just so that it doesn't want to move around as much. Because the downside of it being a little too small is that my prongs have to do more of the work. They have to stretch over the stone to get there. So let's cut both of those in. We'll start with this little guy. And you're going to always check your measurements in case you got really wonky different sizes. And let's try to remember to do it the way that John likes to do it, which is down on the surface and measuring. Oh, I didn't zero my device. There we go. So this 5 millimeter stone is actually 4.9. And so then I'm going to go to my setting burrs. Bear with me. I want to see which one I pulled. I bet I pulled the larger one. 4.9. Yeah, that's a 5.5. It's 5/17. I need to go a little smaller if I can. .93, still a little big. Ideally, I'd like it either at or just below the size of the stone. If I can't find a perfect fit, too big still. If I can't find a perfect fit, then I'm going to go a little bit bigger with these, but just barely bigger, but I'm not going to go all the way in with my drill. Getting bigger, not smaller. Hang on a sec. I have a big gap in my burr sizes. That's going to be too small, I think. Let's see. Yeah, that's a little too small. So I've got a step in between that I'm missing on my burrs. I think I'm going to go with the next size up. So what I'm looking for the small stones is that it be, back out a little bit because you guys are not going to see as I start doing things. It's got to fit in, but not actually cut into my prongs. So if it's too small, if the stone is small, I don't want to cut away the prongs and necessarily weaken them. I'm going to want to mark that and see if they're small enough, I can bend them over as is. If not, I'm just going to cut right above where it hits the stone so that it has a fold point. But I'm not going to do that in one step with this burr. So this burr's only mission for the smaller stone is to put a little bit of an angle into my piece. I am going to switch my shaft so that I can swap these in and out. And a little bit of burr life or other lubrication. If you are not confident in your ability to hang on to such small things, put them into some jet or anything like that. Sure, I'm going forward. I am, because they're going to want to fly around. I'm doing it from the side so that I can try to get my my straight on to the piece. But if you put it in jet, then you could use a drill press and go straight down. Make sure that you've got, a perfect angle into the piece. I know that I have a harder time going from above unless I'm in a drill press and getting a straight line. So that's why I'm liking this straight on angle. And I'm going to cut in a little bit and check it, and cut in a little bit and check it. I just want the slightest angle. Like I haven't even gone all the way out to the outer edge, because otherwise this stone is going to sit very low and I want it to just be resting in there with a little more support. So just that little tiny amount has the stone setting pretty nicely into the bearing, right? Not much to do. Now I need to mark it for where I'm going to fold the prongs, basically. So I'm just going to take my Sharpie. That's not a fine enough Sharpie. There we go. I do have a finer one. And this one's tough for me when I'm working small because I have a hard time keeping it positioned straight up and down. So I'm going to try to hold it in place, probably not with the wax because it keeps wanting to pull up with the wax. I'm just going to hold it in place a little bit with my toothpick if I can to try and keep it flat. It's making it worse, not better. What I want is for it to not move around on me while I'm trying to make my marks, and I'm not having a lot of luck. So this is where I get these. You may be able to do this without thinking about it. For me, I'm too clumsy. My hands are too clumsy right now to keep it in place. So I'm going to have to do my best to just not touch the stone while getting a decent mark. It's incredibly frustrating to have my hands not work the way they used to. I'm constantly having to find alternative approaches to things. Okay, so my marks are going to tell me where I want it to fold. And now I can either, just like we did in our basket settings, I can either do these by hand with a file, or I can come in with a heart burr and put a tiny little notch in there. It depends on what your control is. So I'll do a couple of each. And let's see. Trying to remember the order of files that John likes to use for these. I think we like to start with a triangle file. You just put a little notch in. Try and keep your notch on the side that faces the prong on the other side. The biggest challenge is the smaller these get, the harder it is to get a file in there without mucking up one of your prongs on the other side. Try to do this while keeping it in your view. Is that still on screen for you guys? Yes. So I'm just notching it with the triangle file, just a smidge. Oh, this is a square file though. That's why I'm having a hard time getting my angle. Hang on a sec. My triangle file run off too. Okay, triangle file seems to have gone on walkabout. Let me see if I can find another one. There we go. Off. So I don't recommend these doing this in midair like I'm doing. It's for this, or even resting upward. You want a good support system, but you guys would not be able to see me doing the work if I were down in the position I would normally be doing this in. So I'm just going to do a little bit of notching at the mark, or just shy of it. Again, watching to avoid filing prongs on the other side if possible, because we don't want to put in scratches that we'll then have to take out. On the second one, I'll do this act with the heart burr instead, because this is really hard to get to. And we don't have to do much. We're just, because this is such small prong layering in here, we're just getting enough that we can make it crease at that point. And if we want to go full out, we're going to then go in with a small round file. If you're working bigger than this, you'll probably want to behave like it was a full-on basket setting. And John has a section in that part of the book about moving on to using a crossing file to soften up the rest of the prong above where you're cutting in. These are so small that they're barely going to register that kind of cleanup, I think, but we can see if we need it. Just taking these all down a little bit with the round, deepening those angles across. So now I've got a seat for it, and I've got prongs that I can start to fold if I want to. I'm going to put this back in, and I'm going to start to push the prongs partway in, and then I'm going to pause to trim them because I want to get them to a consistent height relative to it. Where is my prong pusher? Sorry. And I made so these are so small and fiddly for me that one of the mods I did for myself was I adjusted a pair of pliers. If I can find the set that I adjusted, then I'll be a happy camper. I'm cleaning up my studio and probably over cleaning. There we go. So I made a modification to this basic cheap, like I bought a pair of the cheapest possible flat pliers, small scale flat pliers. And I just put similar to what we do for our tweezers for making the basket settings. I put a line down it, and then I put a couple of lines opposite each other because I wanted to be able to hold opposite prongs. Right. So I've got marks dug in, and then I ground them a little bit with a cutting disc, and then polish them all up so that they don't have any sharp edges on them. And so this gives me something that I can get a little bit of a grip and an angle while pushing a little bit of pressure opposite. So I can either use a bezel pusher, or John also recommends that you grind a channel in, and you can hold it in the channel and push the other side's prong. These are so tiny that I'm going to drop them if I do something that specific, like over here. I'm going to have a hard time holding everything. So I'm going to actually start first with just a regular old prong pusher and get partway over on opposite sides. Again, I'm not wanting to go all the way down, just enough that I can see how long I want my prongs, and that my cut that I did is working for me. So step one is to get them all a little bit down. Oops, one of them needs to go down a little further than the rest. It didn't go as far. And then start to see where they're going to land to really hold the stone in. And now we're going to come in and trim them to something that looks good all the way around. So right now it looks kind of ugly because they're sort of big and in the way. And I think I don't want much more than just coming over the girdle. So I'm going to go somewhere right around there. I need it to be enough to hold it in. I'm actually using the table of the stone as my top mark. And then I'm going to be doing some, oops, that one's too low. I'm going to be doing a little bit of cup burr activity on the top of it to give a nice clean finish. Get that little mark off that I did not want. So the first thing I'll do is trim them with a pair of snips while they're up in the air like that. Get my hands under control. A little trim. Take them out to make sure that they're looking fairly equal and that they look like they're still holding the stone where it needs to be. And then I'm going to move to a cup burr. Actually, I'm going to do a little filing, careful filing before I go to the cup burr. So I'm going to use my barrette file, which again, remember, we polished down the edge of the barrette file. So even though it comes without filing surface, we don't want to risk junking things up if we happen to scrape it. And you don't have to use a cup burr for this top, but just like we did on all of our basket variations, we could do a point. So we could just go straight into nothing but filing and get a nice, cool looking point on the tops of these. I'm just trying to take the shape on the edges, the little rough bits from what I just cut down a little. And then on a cup burr, what you're looking for is just barely thicker than the gauge of material that you're using. I think I pulled one out that was good. You don't want it too big. That's a little too big, actually. You don't want it too big, or else it'll create sort of a weird cut effect at the top. And you don't want it too small because you'll get little circles cut in around the outside of the stone. Bear with me while I find one size down. Maybe. I really need to get all my burrs in order again. Let's see what it's going to do right there. Looks good. Okay, so I'm just going to again carefully grab just the end of the material. And I like to do just a gentle rotation without it. You don't want to do too deep of a rotation. You're just trying to grab a little bit of shaping to the end of the prong, and it'll start to look polished and nice if you've got it hitting just right. That's the others. Pretty good. Just let me rinse this off because all that dust is sticking to the wax. Sec. So I know this is a little challenging because we're working so small, but let me show you where we are. I'm going to zoom in and show you where we are so far. So the stone is still loose. My prongs are still part way up, but they're now balled at the ends because I did the cup burr on them. Okay, let's see if I can get any closer without it going out of focus. Woo, too far. Focus. There we go. So you can see they're still upright a bit, but the ends are trimmed and cup burred. So now I'm going to come in, back out a little. Oh, maybe I can just do it right there. And I'm going to come back in and I'm going to either use that bezel pusher, or John recommends you take an old toothbrush and file off the handle of the toothbrush and use that as a pusher. And this is more of an up over now that I'm at this point because I'm trying to actually hold the stone down with it. Just tightening everything up. I really got to get that dust out of there. It's annoying the heck out of me. Let's see where things are setting. Come on. Or if I can't get in, if I'm using a sturdier prong, I could take these pliers that I mentioned and I can hold one side and come up and over the top with the
Slightly
pliers
out of range.
out of range. Let me zoom back out a bit. So I can do a little finish up with the pliers if I need to, or I can get in from the side. Is that the right one? That's the right one. And I can just push down to tighten up that last little bit. And there's bunches of manufactured prong setting pliers out there, and several of them have sort of a hooked nose end to them. I just didn't have a chance to get myself a pair before this setting came up. I've overdone it on one side, so I'm going to need to ply back up a little bit and let the other side come down a little more. Go. Okay, so snug fit. If you need to, you can touch up your setting. Okay, there's a little bit of moving around. I've got a little bit off sides. Push one side down. This is why you do it in increments. It's easy to push it off to one side when you don't mean to. So I've managed to push too far on one side of the setting. Match that up a little bit more. Good basic setting, pretty straightforward. And when you're doing a batch of them at a time, you know, if you do these with stones that you can that can take heat, you can make a whole boatload of them, set them, and just solder them on to your work. So you have, you know, a handful of a diamonds set or a good emerald, good sapphire. Actually, I'm not sure emeralds can take the heat. I can't remember, but sapphires usually can, unless they've been treated, you know, filled. So you can make boatloads of these, just like those cup settings that we were talking about, where you can pump them out, have a set of them, and grab one to add to your decorative element. So that's the little guy, and you can see it's really an ever so slightly too big setting for him, because we can see all of that metal around it. So it's really the prongs holding down to the tubing that's doing it. Now let's do one more with the larger stone, which is going to go the other direction, where we really need to take material away. So when I have one that is this large, I'm going to aim for my very first burr, the setting burr that I'm going to use. I'm going to hope that I can get one that I can cut in everything at once. Meaning I don't have to do the separate step necessarily of cutting in the prongs if I'm taking out material as I go around the edges. I may still have to do a little touch up, but this is going to actually give us a pretty good layer to it. Let me see if I have one smidge size bigger than that. I think I do. My next size up is way too big. So I may have to do a little cutting in, and I said I was going to show you guys using the heart burrs anyhow. So let's pop this out. Cup burr. Sure I have wax or something on it. And if you are doing one of these cuts in that's also going to touch the prongs, it's going to try to fly away from you a lot more. Zoom out a little further. It's going to try to fly away from you as it catches the prongs. So be ready for that and be holding it firmly, or again, even healthier, put it down in some any of the plastics and try to get it straight down from a drill press. It's also going to heat up pretty quickly as you do this. And we want to cut in a little deeper than we did on the last one, because our goal again is to get that stone to sit down in the seat better. Get my wax for this. It's a little bit more cut in than that. I wanted a slight bit deeper, but it's a much lower in cut than what I did on the first one. Always do this kind of cutting in small steps because it's super easy to overkill. Nope, still a little bit more. And what you'll notice if your burr is just the right size is that you're starting to flatten the edges of the prongs at the same time as you're cutting in on the last little bit of the cut. That's what I meant by if you have exactly the right size setting burr, it's going to take care of that step collectively. All right, so this is looking like it's resting about where I want it to be. And this is my preferred fit for this kind of a setting. I would rather have it plonked right on there and really held in than have the version we saw in the small. But you're going to deal with the stones and the tubing you have, and there's no way we want to make a separate little piece of tubing for each version of these if the goal is to make them in batches. Or you buy better calibrated stones than I'm working with. That'll do the trick too. Okay, so we've now got that set in. I mean, we got that cut in. And I'm going to, again, try to keep it centered and flat and mark my positions for where I expect it to fold. And this stone rests high enough that when I make my marks, I'm probably going to be cutting in just below the marks. I think in the basket setting section, John talked about making the mark and then going a millimeter maybe below it. I'd have to look at that chapter and see what it says. I don't think you'd go that's not the right scale for this, but you can cut, because our pen can only get us at such an angle to it. I'm going to cut a little bit below the angle that I'm hitting off of the top of the table. And in this case, I want to show you guys using I'm using a 45-degree heart burr, or am I using a 90-degree? Where's my heart burr that I set aside for this? Goodness, my burrs are all over. Oh, so carefully pulled one out just to have ready, and now I don't know where I put it. Rolled away. Where did I put it? Somewhere else. Let me see. Okay, so I don't need much of a cut in here. I don't want to overpower and cut through. So I'm just looking for something that's probably a little big to start. I'm gonna go a little smaller than that. Because all I want to do is use this to notch. And for this close up, I'm going to need my goggles so that I can see and not get my eyes in danger. Where did I put my goggles? My goodness, guys, I haven't gotten used to the new studio layout yet. Okay. So swap it out. Heart burr. Again, a little bit of wax on there. And I'm just trying to cut where I would have used the files. And I'm just doing a quick little notching in right below the mark that I made. Not more than about a third to a half of the way through. Same principles apply as when we were doing these on the basket. My big challenge with the prong set, but with the heart burrs, is remembering that they have to be usually used at speed, not slowly, because my gut is to say, can I control it by going slower? And the truth is, with heart burrs, you can control it better when it's going faster, which is anathema to me when I'm doing small detail work. But if you go too slow, it's more likely to catch and wrap around to behind whatever you're cutting in. Okay, so I've just cut in the little marks that equate to what I was filing before. I can do a quick pass with my file just to make sure I don't have rough edges. I can figure out where the heck I put my file down. Tiny little file. There we go. Put it away. Normal. So I'm just going to do a little quick cleanup of the burring, the chatter that happens. A little more chatter than the others. Sorry, I know it's hard for you guys to see this one when I'm working this way, but I can't get the angle in there without resting it down. Just touching those up. Okay. Again, we're going to put our stone in place. See how it rests. And we're going to do that first stage push down, not the full push down. Just enough to start holding it. I do opposite sides so that I start to balance out the way it's sitting. If it's going to behave. Come on, little guy. North-south, then east-west. And I'm going to try and do a better job of correcting before I get to the last pushes when it's tipping over more to one side than the other. It's looking pretty equal. Okay, and once again, measuring out my cut positions. A little bit easier. I have a little more leeway. That's actually pretty good height. Once I trim it back a little, I have a little more leeway on the ones that go all the way out to the edge because they're going to be held more directly by the combination of the prongs and the, oops, that's too low, by the prongs and the seat, whereas the little guy was going to slip around in the seat if I didn't have the prongs stretched further across it. Little bit to trim away this time. And I'm just using a pair of Tronics, which have a pretty clean cut, in the hopes of having to do less finish trimming. Just looking to see if they're relatively equal. Got one that's a little taller than the others. Oh, all right. I'm going to again use my cleaned up barrette file. I also seem to have misplaced. In doubt, see where we clean things up. Go. Gonna just take the rough stuff off of that again. And at this point, again, I can either start shaping them with the file to a nice clean, like I like those claw points that John showed us in the earlier chapter. So we could do that. You could do a split if you've got really good control with your saw, you know, and or if you're doing these heavier gauge, so you could do a split down the front of each prong. And clean them up that way. I'm gonna stick with the good old basic cup burr activity. That needs a little more cleanup on the top. Again, I'm still not pushed all the way down at this stage of the game, but it does hold it a little better than it did on the small one because there's less room for it to slip. Same gauge wire, because we made them all the same out of the multi-jig. So this is all 16 gauge wire on whatever gauge tubing we ended up using, the heavy walled tubing. Oops, was there a question? Somebody's chatting. If whoever it is that's chatting, if you can pop it onto mute, that'd be great. So once again, I'm doing a slight rotating motion. This is the thing that's hardest to get. If you're doing your rotation and you see cut marks in, it means you're probably one size too small on your cup burr. But I'm doing the tiniest little bit of rotation. It's not a lot, just a little movement to get the circular top. Oop, I caught a little bit too far on that one. Got a little catch on a couple of these that I'm going to clean up. This little bit of filing. And when we're done with these, you know, you can come back in with a rubberized wheel and get them nicely polished up. Before I did any setting, I did any solder cleanup. I did filing, I tumbled them. You know, all the usual treatments. Up a little.
Rachel.
Yeah.
Is it possible for you to aim the camera a little closer to your hands? Because we see more of that wood
Oh, rotate it this way. Oop,
higher.
I'm sorry. Bear with me. I got to open the camera again. That better? And then zoom in for you.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes. Okay. Now,
Okay.
not so much.
Let me.
More, go a
let me-
little bit out. There.
Okay. So what I did was I caught, because I was talking and trying to cup burr at the same time, I caught a bad angle on a couple of them. So I've got some little marks in there that I can clean up with a file. And again, a rubberized wheel, my favorite, the ones that are called Swifty wheels that I pulled out for a few different things. Those little gray wheels, blue-gray. Are great for final cleanup, but I haven't yet finished setting this. I still need to do my final push down because I was just positioning for the sake of where I was going to trim. So now I'm going to do a little bit more of that, put it into place, make sure the setting is solid. I've got a little overbalancing again, so I'm going to go back to those pliers and give myself a little more push down. What I like about having the pliers or something similar for leverage is that it gets a little, you know, instead of making your fingers do it, it gives you a little bit more push, a little bit more leverage overall. And if I put my glasses back to see what I'm showing you. There we go. So once again, 2 quick little settings. You know, you make a row of those and connect them all together and you've got a nice little bracelet set. Questions about that setting at all? Pretty straightforward. It's just nice that we can do batches of them.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how do you, are you using visors? Because I would think I would go through the prong.
What do you mean you would
Here.
go through the prong?
The actual, when you're trying to cut it so that the table, so you can fold it over.
Yep.
I mean, I know I'm asking because I know for me in the past it's happened where I push it over and it breaks, or
Yeah,
I've
so
gone into
you're cutting too far
much.
through. Yeah. So the answer is my nearsighted vision is insanely good. That's why I keep switching in and out between glasses and connectors. But absolutely, if visors work for you, or what are those amazing, super pricey but really close up glasses, the little add-ons to glasses that are craft optics. Craft optics are another good thing for getting you in close. Anything that works for you to visually see it. A lot of stone setters work under microscopes for everything. And my vision, the way it is my super close up is really good. And I can't stand having things in the way because it keeps my eyes going in and out of focus. But whatever works for you is the answer to see it. Now, if you're cutting through too much with the burrs, go back to using the files. You know, you may have a little more control, and know that you need to stop. You need to pause and do it just a little bit, and then do just a little bit more, and work your way up to the fully cut in settings. But it's practice, practice, practice. I told you guys in earlier sessions, I'm really iffy with the heart burrs, and this project has helped me get more comfortable with them. Not this specific setting, but the whole project. Because I sort of had to, I had to figure out, what am I doing wrong with the heart burrs? Because so many stone setters swear by them. And really, it's that speed thing has been key for me, because my big problem is I'll flip over whatever I'm working with a heart burr more than I will with any other cut. I don't know why, but it constantly catches and wants to zoom around. As soon as one, got good quality burrs, and 2, started speeding up, it improved things a whole lot. So
But
practice.
what's the practicality of this this specific setting? Because it seems like it's, I don't know why would I use this one over just a simple prong setting?
So I can make dozens of these settings in the time it takes to make a basket setting.
I know, but how would you, okay, so you make a dozen. If you are making production, you mean that's good for that?
If you're making production, or as I said, this is the basics of how people make, those tennis bracelets that are just links of, I mean, you do it with a square tube instead of a round tube, and you've got a magnificent little layout. Or you do it with these round ones and then make little hinge connectors. And so there's lots of reasons to have a repeatable stone. But also, let's say that you make a collection that your signature is to always have a delicate little stone set at the clasp, right? You make the same thing over and over again. And especially if you make it with something that can resist heat, so you can just spend an afternoon setting a dozen of them and have them ready. That's a good way to go. But can you think of these, what if you were making a chain and every 5th link you attached one of these elegant little things, or you put them as the connector? It's the same answer for any of the cool settings that we're learning here. Is what's the design purpose of it? First make sure that it's going to hold the stone. That's all. Function is always critical.
Yeah.
And then what is the form you want? And maybe this nice, clean lined, simple prong is a good look for what you're doing, right?
That's a good idea.
So play around with it. And I'm a lot of my work is a rough stone with a single element of a faceted or other elegant stone in a smaller scale that picks up one of the colors from the stone or something like that. Play. That's why.
Yeah.
I mean, how often are we going to use a card cutting? It's a very special setting.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the thing that we're going to start with next for the first setting of chapter 5 is even more obscure about when we use it. It's got very limited usage because we can't use it in rings. We can't use it in high traffic items, basically. So any other questions about that multi-setting, which is in essence just what we did by hand when we did a larger one? It's a step bezel with prongs added. It's just a way to do them in batches. Any outstanding questions?
I have a question about, like, I know I can buy the tube setting, but if I bought the heavy gauge tube, like you had mentioned, how would I know what to buy for, like, 5mm or 6mm? What kind of tube? How do I know the circumference, or how do you figure that out?
So all tubing is measured with an OD and an ID, outer diameter and an inner diameter, right? And for stone settings, you want thick walled tubing. There are several thicknesses of thick wall tubing. And unfortunately, a lot of the tubing manufacturers are limiting the sizes they're making these days. So a good skill to add to your repertoire, if you don't already have it, is being able to make your own tubing from sheet. It's not something I like doing. It's a pain in the butt. And if I were doing it regularly, I would build myself a draw table. Instead, I do small pieces when I need it in a draw plate in a vise. But so it used to be that you could get nesting tubing, heavy walled or otherwise, of every possible gauge down to teeny tiny watchmaker scale and on up to 10 or 12 millimeters. Now you have to get special production runs for certain sizes. So what I do is I buy a selection of the most available tubing and I buy the stones that are right for it. Instead of the other way around. Used to be you could just have an array. Places, if you have wholesale accounts, Ross Metals in New York City still has a good selection. Right now, Rio is actually, it looks like they're closing down. They have on closeout a lot of their heavy wall tubing. I just ordered a bunch. You might want to go in and see and get a few pieces of whatever sizes they still have available. Unfortunately, it's stupidly expensive. It's just like, it's ridiculous compared to other silver. And the problem is that each manufacturer has slightly different specs. So like Rio might have a 3.56 millimeter and Otto might have a 3.62 millimeter. And those small amounts can make a difference. So I have a project on my bench where I literally cannot find the tubing gauge that I started it with, and I'm almost out with 3 hinges left to make. So, you work with what you got. And again, look for that combination of outer diameter and inner diameter. Again, my preference on this setting would be that my outer diameter is just at the size of whatever stone I'm using. Not more than 0.0 something, 0.02, bigger or smaller. Bigger is going to be a little bit more problematic than smaller. But you can't always find it. You just need your stone to not fall through and to be held firmly by the prongs. Any other questions on this one? Okay, did we get Wendy back? Because she had particularly asked to see on screen the device that I showed you guys a couple times ago, the conical, the 17-degree cone from Metal Arts. Put that back up on screen. She's not on, she can at least watch the video. But you guys had wanted to take a peek at that closer up. So it's Metal Arts with a Z. And again, he only did one in a 17-degree layer. And one of the things that has been cool is that being able to mark out my piece. I had forgotten that he also puts this tiny little device. So once you've made your cone, you can rest it upside down and mark your positions for either 2, 3, 6, whatever prongs. He has a set of 4 different templates that he makes that you can either buy individually or as a set.
Where does he sell them?
If you look for Metal Arts cone, you'll find them. I think Auto Fry sells both the individual and the kits, but it was at a few different places. It's a guy out of Massachusetts who just invented
okay.
something he needed and made 4 different templates for different purposes that are easy to produce. And so it's a cool concept
Yeah,
to put in the blackening agent and pick it up on a piece of tape and measure out your pattern.
all
So,
right, that's good.
all right. So
What
go
is
ahead.
that saying? Necessity is the mother of something?
Invention. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Let me check my notes because we were going to go on to, yes, the square wire tubing and square wire prong set cut from 8 gauge tubing. So we are back to the book. We're on dun 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 the last page of chapter 4, page 126. Now, there are a couple of minor notes that I will give you on this. One, John doesn't tell us a lot about how he shapes it, so I've had to play around and come up with some things that work for me. 2, make very careful note of that very first sentence that says, for small stones, 2 to 4 millimeters. I tried making these bigger for you guys so they'd be easy to see on screen, but man, does it not work well. So I am going with a 2.5 millimeter lab grown emerald that I have, which is a delightful little size for 10 gauge tubing, 10 gauge square wire. If you don't have purchased square wire, you can always roll it in your mill if you have a mill. Even if you don't have wire slots, because remember, square wire, we can just flatten and flatten and flatten and flatten. So just rotate it. So this is a basic chunk of 10 gauge. And this is another one of those ones that he suggests making a batch at a time. I'm going to only make one because they're fiddly and you won't be able to see much. But I just took a chunk off to give myself something to hold it with. And I'm going to put it in either a pin vise or a, in this case, I'm going to use my bench pin, my ring clamp to hold it, if I can figure out where the heck I put my ring clamp today. Oh, I pulled it out already, that's what. And before I put it in there, I want to make sure I have a nice flush surface. So I sawed it off, but to get it really super clean, I'm going to pop it in the angle vise and get it a little cleaner. Oh, here. So I'm just going to use a rough file and get it as flush as I can. Am I still on screen for you guys? Let me.
Yeah, you're on.
Oh, just a smidge out. So I just want as flat a top as I can get. Pretty good there. And then I'm going to pop it into a ring clamp so that I can hold it while I'm cutting. Just need enough room to lay this out. And then, as always, John wants us to lay out what we're going to cut. So I'm just going to blacken it with a Sharpie all the way around. And height wise, because of the size of this stone, I'm going to give myself, let's go with 6 millimeters in height. Guy. So I found it was easier if I marked out my height to give myself a sense of, oh, come on. There we go, 6 millimeter. So to give myself a sense of where I was ending. I marked out my height all the way around for the total setting. And then gave myself a little stopping point, another millimeter or so above that. Not coming over easily. I've got the total height of the stone. Actually, it looks a little short, so I think I'm going to put that's going to be my cut 2 mark. No, I don't. It's not short. That'll be fine for this size stone. And then I want to cut in a little bit closer for how deep I'm going to make my cut. So I'm giving myself a second line to cut down 2. It's going to be easier to mark if it's not in my pen. Let me clamp there. Okay, and then I'm looking for the width of the piece, which check it both directions because your square wire may not be as perfectly square as you think. 2.7. Okay, so I'm going to 135 because I have 2.7 millimeters wide. What did I say? 1.35. Go. And I'm going to mark every side. I like to mark from both sides just to make sure that I got my measurements clean. Ugh, I'm not making them clean. I'm going to remark these because I'm making too many scratches. I'm not going to be able to tell where I'm going. I'm also going to cut a mark across the top to give myself a guide because that's mostly what I'm going to see when I'm starting my cut. I want to make sure I've got a center line cross hatched to start my cut. Okay, I don't know if that's showing well to you guys, but there's the little cross hatch. Back in the clamp. Score back in where my stopping line.
So Rachel,
Yep.
you took the width of the actual square.
Yep.
And then you divide it in half.
Yes, and I make a mark. I make score marks all the way around so that I have it 4 quadrants. Let me see if I can show that on screen. Yeah, see, zooming in is going to get us there. Focus, maybe. I don't know if you guys can see that divided in 4 top mark that I've got.
Okay.
So I'm now going to, and this is where I have to position better for you guys. Oh, not that direction. See if I can hold it in a place that you guys will be able to see. So now I'm going to start cutting at an angle with, I'm using a, he doesn't say in this, but I'm using a fine blade. So I'm going with a 7/0 because it's what I had. And he wants us to start at an angle and begin, oops, that's not even tightly enough. Begin with just one of the angles and get it started down the line. And then rotate and do the opposite side. And keep in mind that we don't want to go further than the mark down that you've cut. And we want to keep going equally across. So I found that the starting it at opposite sides was a little bit trickier. But once we got going, I could get a straight cut down both. I'm doing a lousy job of seeing it though right now. Hang on a sec.
So it's as if the lines are converging in the center. You're beginning
Yep.
to see the corner.
Correct. So you start both halves and then, but I have done a very bad job of following my own marks because I'm keep looking up at you guys instead of paying attention. I'm going to cut off my top and start the flat again. Yep, maybe. Not with my tiny little saw blade, I'm not.
What number of saw blade do you need?
So for the angle cuts, I was trying to go with a very fine, a 7/0. I'm just going to switch over and use the other side. And then for actually cutting the tubing, you have to go a little thicker than that. I showed you guys how to flatten something quickly in your flex shaft. I think I've done it in classes, but I'm not sure I've done it here.
No, we did it in the class.
Yeah, let me set that up and I'll get this. This is an alternate way to hand filing, or to using the vise that I used a minute ago. And it's really easy on round. It's a little bit trickier on square tubing. I mean square wire, but you can put your piece of wire in to your flex shaft if it's small enough. And if you can get it well centered, that's critical to this, which is a little harder in square than it is on round, because it's really apparent when square wire is, really apparent when round wire is not in square. Let's see, but we're looking for wobble. That's not too bad. So the trick that gives you a fast, clean edge is you put your flex shaft in reverse. And you take a fairly solid file, a flat file or a barrette file, and you just run back and forth while spinning. And what this does is evens out the top surface. Quickly and smoothly. Oops, except I did the wrong end of my wire. I did the one that I just cut. I'll show you that on the other end too.
But it has to be in reverse?
It has to be in reverse, or you have to work offhand if you're right-handed. Because what you want is you want it moving away from you
Away, yeah, okay.
instead of flinging towards you.
Yeah.
You get a nice clean finish in a hurry when you do that. But again, remember to switch it back from reverse, because if we're about to use our drill for anything else, I constantly forget and end up going, why isn't my drill working? When it turns out it's because it's still in reverse. So let me blacken this end. Make my marks one more time. This time with feeling. I think I'm going to bump up from my 7/0 blades are from an antique collection that I got. So they break really easily on top of being 7/0. So I may pop up to a slightly bigger size. Let's say 6 on this one. So once again, I'm squaring up all the walls, giving myself a line to follow. And I need to make where my stopping line. It's going to be at about 6. Slightly bigger piece overall. I have a little bit of a stem. Second time is the charm. And let's go with slightly heavier gauge saw blade. What do I have next up? 4. I'll do a 4/0. That's really damaged already.
Is the author of John still alive?
Yep. Yep. He's based out of New York. He's not doing a lot of metalsmithing these days. He has a kind of a not official cat rescue program, meaning he and his wife, who has since passed on, take care of area feral cats.
Oh,
And when I say take care of area feral cats, I mean, at times they have had 30.
oh my God.
caring for.
I went online and I key in his name
Yep.
and I saw some pictures, and guess who I saw? Maybe a picture of 15 years ago or more.
Who?
You.
Oh yeah, probably from one of the Aeromont workshops.
Yes. Yes, yes,
Carrying
you are
gently
sitting.
over his shoulder.
Yes, you are sitting to his right. At the beginning, I thought, yeah, that's right.
Not surprising. I have taken a lot of his classes. So I'm just doing a little bit from either side. Come on, little guy, right there is where I want you.
Rachel, do you know if he's still writing his second book?
I hope so, but I suspect that it is not the case.
No.
So again, I found that even though he wants us to start with the 45, once you've got the 45 lined up on both sides, I found it a little easier to cut both at once in order to keep going straight. And then you angle a little bit to make sure you're following the line, and then you go back to straight. So it's sort of a back and forth activity to keep going directly down the line. Yeah, the second book was going to be a book about clasps.
I was lucky enough to take that class where he was
Mhm.
starting to write the chapters. It was really good. I just hope he does.
But that's the class I'm taking in November, right?
You're taking my class, but it's
Yeah,
not,
that's
it's
what
only,
I'm talking
some of it
about.
is stuff I learned from John. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in that.
Can't wait until it's November, but if you can do it earlier, I will be so happy.
Yeah, clasps are one of my favorites. And it's one of the most cool things about it is that you can go to a hardware store and find all kinds of inspiration for making clasps, because there's a lot of clasping mechanisms used in hardware. Oh my goodness, guys, I'm doing such a sloppy cutting job. This is an embarrassment. This is so sloppy. So I'm taking it down to the line that I measured out for where am I going to stop. Actually, I may not need to go that far. So I now have 4 very shaky prongs. They should be much more evenly sized than that. But the next thing that we're going to do is separate them apart a little bit, and then you'll really see how wobbly they are. So this is just a cheapo steel butter knife that I have ground down and then polished a little bit. And it's good for all kinds of getting into small spaces. I'm just doing a separation in both directions, a gentle little bit each direction, so that I'm trying to splay them equally in all quadrants. And sometimes I found I had to sort of come back in and tweak a little bit, but it's my starting point is opening it up into the 4 prongs. Next, I'm going to start cleaning it up with files and other tools. I found that even though, again, he doesn't have a whole lot in here about how he treats it once he's got them cut. He just has that lovely hand-drawn file that seems to be magically doing all the work for us. The series of things that I found that were useful were sanding discs and a heart burr, because we're going to put a little seat in this one. And again, possibly using a cup burr on the tips. A little bit, I used a crossing file or a barrette file to get in there to clear the basics. So where's my tiny barrette file that I have pinned down? Where the thin one is, we'll see if we can get in there. So I'm first going to just do a rough cleanup. And again, remembering to do all the sides, because we've got the angles coming in from each direction. So I'm just trying to get the rough from my bad saw job cleaned up a little bit. And one of the things he does is he takes down the corners here. And for that, I found a crossing file was the best to get a nice clean shape to it, but it's going to depend a lot on what you want for shaping your finished product. So now I'm going to take that crossing file right below where I've finished my cut, because this is sort of the stem of, I think of it as sort of a champagne flute we're making here. That's going to hold the little stone. So I'm just rounding off the corners to just give a little bit of shape and interest to the bottom of the flare. And then I work that up the corner a little bit. So I get sort of a taper coming off of the corners. And you can do as much or as little of this kind of shaping as you want. Just like with our crown settings, we can play around with the profile. But even that little bit of adding the elegant curve at the bottom you can see it starts to take, I don't know if you can, this is so small that we're working, but you can see that even that little bit starts to give it more interesting profile. Right. And then I'm going to come in and grab my sanding discs and really start to take away material around the edges. Get to my other setting, other flex shaft. So I'm going to start with a fairly coarse one. And I'm just using this because I can get it in between and really get down into the angles that I've cut. Ooh. Come on, look at that. And again, I have to remember to do all the sides. And so I'm going to show you what we're ultimately aiming for is to set a teeny tiny little stone. Is 2.5 millimeters out. Come on, just one. So this itty bitty little stone that we're going to put in here is going to just sit down in the prongs. But we're going to have to set a seat for it so that it'll stay. But are you guys getting the sense of just how delicate and small this is? I probably don't actually need this as wide as I've got it, or even as deep. It depends on how much prong I want above the stone.
That is ridiculously small.
I know, can't even see it.
Yeah, it's itty bitty. So this is 2.5, but again, it really, he says no more than 4 millimeter. And he ain't kidding. So I'm going to just use a little more aggressive filing to shape these points a little bit more.
Why did you go with the tiniest?
2.5 is not the tiniest. It's just the size I had that I could do some consistent practice with, because I don't work with stones much smaller than 3 or 4 on a regular basis. So it was either this or my 1.5 millimeters.
Oh my God. Okay.
I don't have a whole lot of 4 millimeters that I was willing to, you know, I have some good sapphires in 4 millimeter, but they're set for real projects, not practice projects. But I also, before I even came to you guys with this exercise, I did pull out a chunk of like 6-gauge square wire to see whether it was doable. And it came out so ugly. It's just overwhelming the stone in ways that this version of it isn't intended to. So I would spend a lot more time than I am now really trying to get all my prongs to be well shaped to equal each other. But the gist of this is a little bit of cutting and a lot of filing and finishing. And you get some really intriguing captures for, again, decorative element type stones. You know, you might put this sitting on the bail of a larger piece, just as a little extra bling. It's a fairly pokey setting, so I'm not sure that I would use it at the nape of the neck per se. I might set it inside of a hollow form. A hollow in a hollow form would be really interesting. So it sticks out like a little plant growing out of it. I think what else I might use this for. I could see scattering them around like little sprouts on some larger textural piece. But they're really fairly singular in look. You know, they don't, there's not a lot of variety to this, except a little bit about what you do to shape the exterior of the piece. And let me get all the black marks and stuff off of it so you can see the whole thing a little more carefully now. So pretty much from here on up is the setting, and I'm going to close it in a little bit. Again, that modified set of pliers that I made is handy for this. And I'm trying to get equal spacing, both side to side and sort of relative to each other across the frame. Just tighten that up a little bit. Let's see where that puts my stone sitting. The wax overwhelms. I think I may even want to push them in a little closer because that's going to be pretty low. And I've got one extra clunky prong here that I want to take down a bit. The neater you cut, the less you have to do this part of it. And again, I did a lot of my trim down and clean up with my sanding discs. Get my sanding disc flipped upside down and they work a little better. Okay, so I'm going to not take this to the super high polish that I would probably do before I get ready to set it. I'm just going to show you guys setting directly. So I'm going to determine where this is going to sit, which is tricky to position when it's so small. But I want to get it resting in there as if it was not yet cut in, which it isn't. Come on, little guy. Other end. Oh my goodness.
Don't blow too hard.
Right? I have done that and knocked a boatload of stones off in my enthusiasm. Okay, I'm just going to try holding it there. See if I can. I need a third hand in order to keep it held and use the marker that I want to use to rough where I want my stone to sit. All right. I'm putting a little bit of wax on the bottom and seeing if I can get it to stick. There we go, that made it happen. It gets me close enough that I can judge roughly where I want it to sit. So what I'm marking out is where I think it's going to hit the where it's going to actually rest against the metal at the collet of the stone. Sorry, not at the collet, at the girdle of the stone. Take that back out. And I'm going to look for a small profile cutting burr, heart burr. Swap that in. And my goal is to get set cleanly inside of these points. Out for my goggles again. I put them. Oh my goodness, I'm putting everything down and I can't find it today. There we go, goggles. So I'm just using the burr again, remembering that speed is important to cut in. It's a little trickier how close these are together. Sometimes you can get more than one at a time started, and then that'll give you the path. But I'm just looking for a little resting spot. Now we get that stone back on the wax. So I'm going to clean all the wax that's on it off, and then I'll maybe be able to get it a little bit better grip. Nice thing about manufactured stones is that they're often really well calibrated. And the color is spectacular. I would happily use these man-made stones in my work. So in a perfect fit, you're going to get a little click as you go in. I don't think I have a perfect fit. I'm a little too widely set right now. I'm going to take my prongs in again a little bit more. It looks like I got them a little out of whack as I was doing that. Sorry, guys, I know you're not seeing much because this is so tiny. I'm just trying to get the stone to sit right in what I've cut. And then I'm going to do a little bit of snugging up. Again, another reason to have these modified pliers. And then I'm going to try and bend a little bit over to really hold the stone right where I cut the seat. And I've got way too tall on my prongs, I think, for this. I could leave them there visually. They're kind of interesting, but they're going to catch on things like crazy. So I'm going to trim these back a little bit more once I've got this a little snugger. And then we'll finish this guy off with the cut burr and be done. Where's my snips? It wasn't originally a setting that terribly much appealed to me because it was sort of, it felt basic, but with tiny stones, it actually ends up being quite an elegant little view from the top. I really like how it looks from above.
It's so
even-
cute.
Rachel, can
Yeah,
you
I
bring
like
the camera
it.
down a little bit? Rachel,
Pardon?
can you bring the camera down a little bit?
Oh, yeah, zoom in. Hang on a sec. I gotta
Yes,
switch
please.
glasses so I can see what I'm doing. And this is not done yet. We still gotta do a cleanup on it. Does that zoom in? No, let's zoom out. Come on, focus. Focus, maybe. Here, let me clean off the extra dust. That's not helping make it look any better. That's too small. I can't get in there right now, but
There, don't move it. All right, that looks
I love that.
neat.
yeah, it's a
Good.
neat
Looks
idea.
really nice.
It's once again one of those only a couple purposes for it kind of settings. And let's clean the turning it, but doing the cup burr on this one really
Yeah.
blings it up. So let me get a good sized cup burr and you'll see, because suddenly it's all neat and pristine looking when you do that. Again, doesn't have to be a cup burr finish. If you're good at filing, you can make these really interesting points. Really need one of those little fiberglass brushes, and I don't know where mine is.
What do you use those brushes for?
Just to brush bits of detritus, the silver bits that are stuck to this, and I mean they're used in enameling, which is where mine is probably.
Yeah, but is that better than a toothbrush, an old toothbrush?
No, a toothbrush would work for this purpose as well. Okay. So focus.
Pretty.
Yes, very
Yes, it
pretty.
looks pretty.
Let me see
I
if I
like-
can get it to focus for you.
Mm,
Almost needs to be a little further back.
The green is nice.
Yep. So
So
just
cute.
that little bit adds up, and then we saw it off. And again, if we've used a stone, we can, you'll obviously you'd have to saw it off beforehand if you're not using a heatable stone.
Right.
So you cut it and do all your finishing while it's still on the rod,
Yeah.
but don't do your setting. And then cut it off and solder it, and then you do your setting. But it's a pretty delicate little setting. Like these will catch pretty easily. So you want a nice finish to it. And I'm just going to, otherwise for mine, I'm just going to cut it off for the sample that it is. Once I've got it as clean as I want. I could even come in again with my Swifty wheel and do a little bit of polishing up, get everything clean. Do the tops a little bit, but the tops come up pretty sparkly the way they are. And suddenly it goes from a square rod to voila, we have a nice little setting.
great.
Questions?
Yeah.
It reminds me of in high school when you got pre-engagement rings. They're just really cute and simple like that.
Yeah,
Let me see your diamonds. Let me see.
the little can't even see it.
Yeah.
So
It's funny.
that's the last setting in chapter 5. The only other thing I wanted to do today, because I want you guys practicing it between now and the start, that was the last in chapter 4. And we'll go back and do those catch-up projects. I did post on the Facebook group some of the ones that I know I want to catch up on. So if you think of others that you'd like to see a repeat on, let me know on that list. But I do want to prep you guys a little bit more for chapter 5. So I'm going to show sharpening the graver.
Yay.
And I'm going to show how to practice your stitches, because you will want to practice your stitches a lot before we hit the stitch settings, which is our first setting. And we're going to use that graver, the sharpening and everything a lot during the next session. So if you are playing along at home, there's 2 things that you'll want to have handy, both of 16 gauge or thicker material, and you'll want a bunch of really small stones, like under 4 millimeters for all of these next settings. So we're going to have a practice sheet for stitches, which I'll show you in a moment. And that can be flat, or if you have a graver's ball, you can do what we're going to do for the larger settings that we're going to practice, which is just solder on an angular plate that you can hold this thing in a vise, either a ball vise or a regular vise, because you do not want stuff moving on you while you're working with the graver settings. We need that precision. And what I'm going to show, I have my close-up camera. I can bring it to my close-up camera. What I'm going to show you about the practice setting plate for this chapter is I want you to note I've gridded it in sort of roughly equal grids, north, south, east, west. And then I did a divot in the center. So I did a hex across each of my little squares and did a divot. We're going to put a different stone setting, or we'll do multiples of each setting to practice in each of these positions. Okay. And that'll be our star setting and our bead setting. We'll probably practice both of those in here. If you go thicker, you could also hold them for chapter 6, I think it is, that has the faux gypsy setting, the flush settings. But for that, at the very least, you're going to want a chunk of plate that you can set a bunch of stones in. And this is one of those settings that you're going to want to see your progress. So you'll say, I'm going to do my first one here, and then you'll work your way across and you'll see how much better they get as you do a series of them. But both of those are handy to have prepped. And then for our first setting, we're going to need tiny cabs. We're going to do stitch setting as the first setting. And so you want small cabs. Round is going to be the easiest to practice on, but where's my sample of the not round? It is possible to set other shaped stones. This is bigger than you should be setting with this setting. They will not stay on under any usable conditions, but I wanted to see what the limits were. So this is a stitch setting. Let me show you up close. Oop, that's not up close. Is that going to focus for us? So those are stitches holding that in. Right? So again, it doesn't have to be round, but it does need to be a cab, a good flat backed cab. And it really should be smaller than these stones. I think these were 5 millimeters or something, because it was all I had to practice with at the time. So I'm going to show with these 4 millimeters when we do
Those prongs?
those are not prong, they're prong-ish. Those are stitches.
Okay.
And that's what I'm going
Okay.
to show you guys how to practice, because you need to practice your stitches before you try to put them onto a setting a lot.
So those stitches don't go over the stone. They just go on the sides, right?
They go up the stone, and it's one of the reasons you need a smaller stone than this, is they really should go a little higher up. They need to hit, they act as prongs. They're just taken out of the metal beneath instead of actually being prong, like we're not soldering prongs in, we're peeling them up from underneath the stone.
Okay.
So,
Size.
yep, question?
What size are the stones, the red ones that you had
So
there?
these are 4 millimeter that I'm going to be using in the
Okay.
practice. That's sort of the biggest that he recommends for this setting, I think. And
Okay.
it was something I had in a convenient, these are pretty well calibrated set.
Yeah, I have those.
Yeah. So if you have for the first of the settings, for the stitch setting, the 4 millimeter cabs or smaller is a good way to start. Much smaller, and it's going to be a little fiddly for your fingers because you have to kind of hold things in place at a couple spots to give them you do it in steps basically. So let's talk about, I'm always going to mix up the names of them, so I'm going to go to refer to the book. We're on page, where are we for sharpening the gravers? We are on page 137, 138. We're on 138. So India oil stones are these double-sided ones that I'm going to back out a little bit so you guys can see a little bit more.
Is that the Arkansas stone?
This is the, sorry, yeah, Arkansas stone. No, this is an India oil stone.
Is that the same or is different?
No, so this is an Arkansas stone and this is an India oil stone. Think of it as, coarse sandpaper and fine sandpaper or polishing paper rather, right? So these come with two textures on them, and there's the coarse texture and there's the slightly finer texture. John never bothers with the coarse texture. So we're doing our sharpening on the finer version of the Arkansas stone. And then the oil stone is used only for a final polish on the flat graver. So we're not actually going to use this one today, because we're going to sharpen the number 52 that I fitted last time. So this was the one that I created the handle sizing for in last session's demo, which means that it's just really, my fingers are holding it. This is even a little long for me still, but I get my fingers are just supporting it towards the end, right? With the handle sitting in the palm of my hand, because I want to have that support when I'm pushing. Another tidbit that John gave us is how to protect your gravers is go to your hardware store and buy this tubing, the plastic tubing.
Oh, I have that.
Your gravers in there. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Right, just there's a bunch of different sizes, so make sure you get the right width for it. The other thing I realized I didn't do on the last session is John will often carve away a piece of even the front of it. We carved the handle, but I didn't do any carving on this. I will show that on another session when we're handling one of the other gravers. It's less critical on this stitch one. I kind of personally like having my fingers right at that point that I'm pushing. But if you're trying to get into small spaces, you need that trimmed away. And he has a whole section in the cutting and prepping about which ones he cuts, how steeply. So it depends on the shape of the graver, whether it's an onglet or a flat or a round. All right, so he also has sections on some of the lovely tools that are out there for sharpening. But the one thing that John does, he just does it by hand. The stone needs a little bit of oil. I've been using the 3-in-1 oil, and by a little bit, I mean like a drop. I've already oiled this one. And then it's about holding the graver in such a way that you are creating a, let's see if I can put my block down because we need that for later. So I got to keep this in an angle I can work. What we're looking for is staying straight on, except he wants us to steepen the angle on the 52s. Let me see which one, how steep he wanted it. I think he wanted us to bring it up to like a 30-degree angle. Let me get to the right tidbit on this. Yeah, on the round, 60 degree. He wants us to, so they start life at like a 30, and he wants us to get steeper on the angle. No, I'm sorry, the other way around. He wants us to go, where does he want? Graver, round, belly to spine. It's a fragile 45 degree. He wants it reground to a 60-degree angle. So he wants a steeper angle. So we're gonna in the course of our first sharpening, we're gonna improve the angle on it. So right now when we're flat, we're creating that 45 degree it came at. We're gonna build towards a steeper one. So some of that is about grinding a lot away, and he's creating this position where you're holding at the angle you want in your fingertips. So you act as a tripod to get that grind. Now we have to take a bunch away. So right now I'm just going to do a little bit of heavy grinding. And he says some people like to go forward and back, others like to go side to side. I'm feeling I have a little bit more control going side to side. And I'm just lifting a little bit at a time to try and reshape that angle that he's asking us to change. So I'm just working the reshape, and this could take a while because it's a big change for the degrees. If it's catching, you may need more oil, so I'm gonna go grab my oil. And as soon as you start this sharpening exercise, remember, don't drop this thing on your leg or anything while you're sitting there. It's a sharp little device. So John said you could use the 3-in-1, or you could use a wintergreen oil, which he tells us in the beginning of the book to get, but at the end of the book here, he tells us he doesn't like the smell of it, so he doesn't actually use it. So I have both. I didn't want my space filled with wintergreen oil, but it may be better than the smell of 3-in-1. So again, I'm just doing a slight lift off the back end. This is being lifted up while this is being pushed down to try and change the angle as I go. I'm going to wipe a little bit of excess material away. Do remember we are creating a little bit of steel dust, so you don't want it in with your other materials.
What number is that you're
Pardon?
working on? What number engraver?
52. This was the one he called the workhorse. We're going to use this one for multiple settings, and then we start adding in the other gravers after the first couple.
Where are the numbers? I have 2 here, but I don't see a number in here.
On the handle, on the tang of it, what the part that got hidden away, if you cut it short, mine is right there. Depends on the brand where they put it. It might be back in the tang if you've already got it handled.
No, this doesn't have a handle.
Okay, and do you have the packaging it came in or anything?
They're just little vials of plastic.
Huh. Do you have your paperwork from when you ordered it?
Oh, I have the Onglet. Is that the one you're using?
You have the what?
Onglet. ONGLETT.
No, we're using, so 50, Onglet is the number 4. Or it's in the small number
Yeah.
range.
I have number 4.
Yeah,
I
I'm
have
doing
two
the
numbers.
I'm doing the round, which is 52.
So I should get that.
So if you want to do all three of the graver settings that he's showing us, or 4 graver settings, you'll
Yeah.
need all 3 shapes that he mentioned. You need a round, you need an onglet, and you need a flat. The flat you may already have because we were using it for bright cutting when we were doing our step bezels.
No, I don't have that. I need round. And what else did you say?
Round, onglet, also sometimes called anglet.
Yeah, that I have. And the other one?
Flat.
Flat. Okay.
He's got numbers that he recommends in the book, but he also says that you can have ones on either side of the sizes he recommends. He's just giving us if you have to have a basic set, here's what I'd go with. I think it was 52, 42, and 4 were the numbers he uses. And if you talk to a graver, they'll be horrified that you only need 3.
Oh yeah, I know. They are very how can I say, purists?
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay, so I've been going very quickly just to try and change the profile, the angle a little bit, and I could be at it for a few more hours. So I'm going to instead just switch over to the process for showing the actual sharpening, sharpening with intent. We're making a tripod of our fingers and thumb and supporting the piece and doing a slow, clean move back and forth because we need to keep the surface flat to the stone. Right? Okay. Slow and steady wins the race on this. If you need to, bring a little more oil in. But you want to, so my fingers are getting scraped along the stone on all touch points too, in order to keep this from tipping one way or the other. And then I'm going to clean a little of the grease off. And then what you want to do when you think you've got it sharp enough is you're going to test it by catching on your thumbnail or fingernail. Don't poke too hard. If it slides off, it's not sharp enough yet. And I think I need to do a little bit more sharpening. So again, giving a little tripod with your fingers and thumb, making sure you're flat to the angle you're trying to get to. and focusing on keeping it all perpendicular to the stone during the whole process. Switch over because I'm getting really oily there. Okay, check it. Now it helps if I don't have oil helping it slide. So that's catching. And the last thing you want to do is a couple of taps into your wood block to knock the end off. And then you'll see that you have a good catch overall. Okay. So the other stone is only used on the finishing polish on the flat graver. So what we do, the difference between what we're doing with this and what we're doing with the flat graver is once we've done this stuff, the flat graver, we do a draw along the back of the piece on this edge. We do a draw back along here a few times and get that little tiny lip of it on the other end into a high polish. And that's because we're doing our bright cuts with that. So this one, we only care about the actual cutting surface on the front. Questions about that? Practice, practice, practice. This is the thing that literally every class I took with John, I was like, John, can you teach me this again? Can you teach me this again? Because your brain really needs to practice it to get it functional. I can see I still need to focus on not tipping as much because I've got an ever so slight curve at the upper end. That may have been because I was rushing to try and change the angle a little bit, but this will be good enough for my showing you what I want us to do on stitch practice. So stitch practice, we're going to start with a fairly good sized piece of 16 gauge or heavier material. And we're going to draw out for ourselves 2 lines about 1 millimeter apart. So just square up. I'm going to refresh my lines because I wiped them off a little too much. I need a better pen than that. So I'm just giving myself a top line and a bottom line. So really messy.
Ellie, can you get the mail?
Goodness, my pens don't want to behave today. Oh. Right. Hopefully that's enough that you guys can see that I've got these 2 lines. And you're going to want to have something like this. Let me see if I can angle my light a little differently. Hang on, see if I can get the glare off of you guys. Does that help?
How far apart are those lines?
So they're about 1 millimeter apart for this first practice exercise, because
Okay.
we don't want to go much taller than that. Roughly, doesn't have to be exacting, but you just want 2 lines because the practice is about going from edge to edge. I'm going to move my camera back a little bit to see if you guys can sort of see over my shoulder a little better. Sorry guys for the wobbles. How's that for an angle? Are you seeing my 2 lines up at the top?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing that has been hardest for me to learn on stitching, this is just a block I'm pushing up against so it doesn't go flying. But the hardest thing for me to learn has been to not push, right? So a stitch is done at a slight angle. You're putting your sharp end into the metal and you're doing a rocking action and not trying to push. So we don't want to be too steep because otherwise we'll break off or we'll gouge in. We don't want to be too shallow because otherwise we'll scrape across. So we're looking for that just right. He's got the exact angle he likes. I think it's 30 degrees. And we're doing a wobbly walk. Oop, I pushed too much. I skipped off of it. So I'm gonna start back in and do a little bit steeper, but not much. And a wobbly walk without a lot of push. Oops, I'm doing a lot of wobbling. Sorry, usually this would be a lot closer to my face. I'm trying to give you guys camera angles. And once I get just in front of that second line, I lift up. Right? And there should be a teeny tiny little stitch lifted up at the end. It's got a little bit of a curl to it. Bring my light back over and see if that'll illuminate. Yeah, it's too bright. I need something just in the middle of these two lighting amounts for you guys. So I don't know if you guys can see, but there's that little stitch. It's half the height it should be because I skipped a little bit. I broke it halfway through. But what we're doing is row upon row of these little things. I'm going to see if I can do this down here where I can get a little closer and still stay in camera. So I'm starting at line 1 and I'm doing a rock back and forth. I should see a little bit peeling up as I go, but not too much. And then I get to my other line and I'm done. And I want to make batches of these that all get to the same height and same depth. So I'm not literally not doing any pushing. I've got pressure against it, but I'm not like forcing it forward. I'm forcing it towards the other line is a little bit more of like I'm thinking it towards that line. I don't know how to describe it. It's not a full-on push. It's just enough pressure to push back against the strength of the metal. And I get a series of stitches, and just that last little bit is what takes it up. I'm getting very curly stitches, so I must be pushing a little harder than I should be. Let me lift up these stitches so you can see. And you want to be able to get a little bit of lift if you are pushing it back upright and it's snapping, then you're going too steeply into your metal. I mean, you're going too shallowly into your metal because you haven't got enough material on each prong, or each stitch rather. But if you're like getting stuck halfway across to the line and you can't actually go any further, you're going too steeply angled, right? Because you're digging down instead of across. So it's this happy medium between them that gets you to a series of strong enough to hold stitches and of the same height. Those are the two goals with our practice exercise is, can we get them consistently a good thickness so that they won't break off easily? And can we get them consistently to that same height? Because what we're going to do when we're actually setting a stone with this is we're going to be making these stitches from underneath where the stone would be sitting. So we only have a limited run. It's not like we're coming from the outside in. We don't have all the practice space around it. We only have literally that 4 millimeter circle that the stone is going to be on. So we have to go across and go boop, 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 and poop. I have my little stitch on that side, turn it around. Boop, boop, boop. I've got my stitch on that side. Then we mark and measure the other two to make sure it's well positioned, stitch those two, and our stone fits down in between them, right? This practice phase is really important to this so that you don't throw things across the room when you're actually doing the setting. Questions about that as the exercise that I'm recommending you do?
What?
Sharpen often.
Are
Question.
you using sterling silver?
I am, yeah. As opposed to?
Copper, brass to
So,
practice?
I don't know that copper would be strong enough with these tiny little stitches. Brass would absolutely be a good practice material for it. Fine silver is going to be probably a little too soft. So I'd stick with sterling or nickel or brass, but not likely copper or fine silver.
What about, okay, I understand that I need those 3 or 4 that John recommends, but I don't have any handles. Do I buy one for each?
Yes, you do. You absolutely do. And if you weren't on last session, I did one of the
No, I wasn't.
handle.
I wasn't.
Yeah, so go back and watch how we set the handle and follow along with what's in the book. Because you need to size them and put the handle on and make sure you're getting the handles that have the metal support. Very, very important, because you can find a lot of knob handles out there, but this is what keeps it from sliding back into your hand if the wood splits.
I have something, but I think can I show you? Well,
Sure. Any other questions before, like, so we can go to show and tell and open broad questions and so on. Is there any other questions on the prep? Yes, that looks like good support. Is that a screw in for handles so that you can put?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, Sonia, it looks like you could slot in and be done.
Yeah,
setting.
but I don't know. I don't know if this is enough.
Well, if that
Well, I
can
have to
easily
have
swap
the
in and
wood.
out, it is, but you still need to size your blades. Your blades come probably too long unless you have ginormous hands.
Oh, okay. Oh, I understand now. Okay.
Yeah. Any
Okay.
other questions on the stitching practice part or sharpening? Again, sharpen often. If it's slipping on you when you try to catch it, it means you need to sharpen again. Sharpen, test it on your thumb, tap, tap, tap into the wood. Never hurts to sharpen more. And that's why we learn to swap our handles out when they get when it gets ground down too far, so they last longer. Any others?
Yeah, I have these GRS. They're already cut down.
Itty bitties. Is that not too
Yeah.
short? Do they come with a
No,
long?
because with the handle, it fits perfectly.
Let me
Nice.
see. I think that's the
Here.
same thing I have.
Yeah, they come in these little square tubes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
nice.
So I
GRS
don't
is
have to do
pricey
anything
for
to
me.
this.
I'd love it.
Yeah.
So that, oh, okay.
Yeah, they're already cut. These particular ones, they come in different lengths. And you
Nice.
just have to sharpen them, I guess.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
I'm
Mm,
a little confused as to the picture on page 134.
Yep.
And because I ordered mine a while ago and I really did the whole filing and the whole
Yep.
thing, but I have to redo it. But the ones that I have in my hand, are these the correct ones?
So it's a little hard for me to see up close. One of them should have a flatter edge than the others. And can you see your numbers on them?
Yeah, when I ordered them, I thought it doesn't look like that, but I have a 52.
Okay, so that's what I just used right now. That's the round,
Okay, and then I have a 4.
which should be the onglet, which has a little bit of like a teardroppy profile.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
and then I have a 42.
Which is the flat. Yeah, so it has a little flat line across the top, right?
So I have them.
You do have them, yep. And that flat one is the one that you'll use the second stone for, and you'll draw it backwards to polish the bottom edge of the along that second stone.
Okay, then I'm gonna mark them.
Yeah,
I
I
definitely.
just was confused.
What I
And
need,
What was that, Sonia?
I need the flat. I don't have a flat.
Yeah, the flat is one that people usually get early on because it is used for the bright cutting on.
I never
on-
did dry cutting.
Yeah, but once you get it, and you get good at sharpening, that's the trick for me, is because I so get frustrated by sharpening that I never want to sharpen it in order to get my bright cut, but boy, it looks good on a heavy wall bezel in particular. It's just such a nice finish.
Yeah, I'm just traumatized because, not really, but my father said that sharpening is, and he was an artist.
Yep.
It's the most important thing.
It's
that you
absolutely
need
the
to
most important.
learn how to sharpen.
Yep,
So
for both
this
your own
is-
safety and for the quality of work that you'll get out of it. Because it's just like having dull knives when you're in the kitchen. If you have dull
Yes.
knives, they're more likely to cut you. They're more likely to go astray when you're doing the work. But you know, I don't own one of the little machines that he shows in there. And GRS, if you're buying GRS, the full toolkit they have has a mechanical sharpener as part of their package, which locks it in and everything. Yeah. So that gets you your perfect angle, unless John wants you to change the angle on it, and then you have to play around a little bit.
No, I rather learn. I don't want a machine because, like I said, this is my Achilles heel. I cannot.
Yeah.
Sharpen. It's just.
It's one of mine. It's one of mine too. Anybody have other questions or any show and tell this week?
Well, I just what I told you. What am I going to do with this?
Let's see it again. And everybody else let's get some ideas for what she's going to do with it.
Yeah, see.
That's beautiful.
It'd be a
The
nice pendant.
Yes.
It would be a nice pendant just hanging directly down. Either
pendant from a chain.
either from angles,
right.
from 2 points, or
Upside
from
down.
1 point hanging straight down, depending. You can have 2 different looks. Yep.
Hanging from here.
Could
Yeah.
put, you
Like-
could put a jump ring across your
Yeah.
open, like a half jump ring across the opening, and then hang.
There is enough room. Look how much room there is.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You could drill through it. You could attach it to a back plate. Put some decorative texture around it. You could make earrings out of them. Hell, if you have another one, make some nice big earrings out of them.
Oh,
I do. I have to make another one. Now, Rachel, you showed the magazine where they had put the piece that you made. I'm having
No,
such
not
a
that
hard
I
time.
made.
Where is that magazine?
Not that I made. No, that is Nance Allen's piece. It's up on the Facebook group. And it was a copy of Lapidary Journal. That was the first place I was ever aware of seeing a fancy cut card setting before I'd even met John. I think before,
But-
maybe it was after.
But where is it?
Where is the piece?
Where is the magazine, the cover?
The cover is
picture.
an image that I posted on the Facebook group.
I couldn't find it.
Okay.
Let me look again.
Let me see if I have the image still, and I'll bring it up on screen here.
Okay, I'll show you one more thing. Just since
If you have it, I'd love to see it because I'm not on Facebook.
Okay, let me see. I don't know whether I kept it or just copied a link from, at the very least, I can bring up the Facebook group and bring it up.
Well, I'll show you since the camera is still on me. I'm doing this rings. I'm fusing wire,
Oh, nice.
and then I'm gonna put a stone there, and I'm gonna blacken them.
Cool. Are you gonna
Yeah.
use one of the settings that we've been working on?
I have to find a way to use the settings that we have done, but this one, I don't know. I just wanted to show you that, but I have so many projects. I mean, there's just like 50 or 60 projects on my table.
Oh
I
my
can
gosh.
relate. I can relate.
You can
I know the
relate.
feeling.
Yeah, I know.
I'm like, I need to really just focus on one system. There you go.
Ah, there it is. Thank you.
So this is a piece that Nance Allen did. She teaches as well. She teaches out of Seattle. I don't know if she teaches this technique. This is a very, very old project of hers, but you can see that it's the same principle
The same
It's just-
principle, yeah.
extended out from each of its layers.
Ah, I like
And
it.
it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
Okay, that's great. I'm gonna make the hole in one of the
You read the year of the issue? I see December.
Oh,
Oh yeah, that's a good idea too.
December 2011, it looks like. I think it's fuzzy. Unfortunately, this was just a link from the Lapidary Journal site. But
I
it's
put it
Fine,
on
thank you. I
website.
have every issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I have them packed away in a box. I've been trying to find a school to donate them to. Anybody else? You say, Carmen, you said you had some show and tell?
Yeah.
Show.
What you got?
Okay. So, last time, I was having problems with the cone and trying to figure it out to have the cone setting.
Yep,
I sort of did this
nice, good,
and I did a pattern,
good.
and every time I finished my piece, I noticed that I had to go lower and lower. That's what the black is.
Yeah,
So I'm not quite sure that I got the measurements right, but I made this ring.
Look at that. That is killer. That's a cocktail ring if ever there was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Looks like a cocktail on top of it. Fabulous.
Wow.
So I haven't set the stone and I
Yep.
haven't set the prongs because of what I said to you. I don't know if what I need to do. So it's still there,
Yeah.
but it's holding.
Yep. So I can't tell whether the so the cone setting, the conical settings that he did, we were setting down inside of the cone. And this looks like your stone is resting just on top of it. Is that correct? Or is it actually in the? Okay, you do have a little seat. Excellent.
Yeah.
So then if it's resting on the seat,
Yeah.
oh, so you did you used the cone, but you did a step bezel. That's really cool. So you did an interior layer and an exterior layer, or did you carve that with setting burrs or something?
No.
Two
What I
layers.
did was, because this was too big, I
Yep.
sliced it and then I used the same one and I just cut it smaller and I soldered it in there.
Nice. Okay. So that's beautiful. So you've done a blend of a step bezel and a prong, a decorative prong. So if your stone is sitting on that wall that you've built inside, then that means there's a little bit of room around the top of it that you can actually use to push down as if it were a traditional setting, right? Just a straight up bezel setting. So the first thing I would do is where your prongs aren't on whether you consider that north south, do east west, whatever the opposite sides are where there are not prongs, do a little push down of the bezel, ignoring your prongs for a while, and set as much of it as you can like a traditional pushover bezel.
Here.
Yeah, there, and then work your way along each side, and then push the prongs down a little bit and work your way around that. And so the prongs are just an added decorative element. What's going to hold the stone is really pushing down around the material.
Yeah. I haven't done anything because I was concerned. I wasn't sure if I was doing it correctly. I wanted to make sure.
You've created
Yeah.
I was thinking you were doing a traditional cone like those two that I showed at the beginning of this session, and you've managed to combine some really cool aspects of several of the settings we've covered from John.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I
very
was trying to
cool.
do. I was trying to follow the book
Yeah.
and I couldn't figure it out. So that's
So-
why it was so hard, because this stone is not round.
Not round, right? Yeah. So you added some extra challenges for sure. The thing I would say, if you were going to do another one of these in the future,
Uh-huh.
is that you might want to either cut away the little sliver of your wall that is in front of the prongs before you put the prongs on. Like let me draw this for you. Hang on. Uh-oh, the camera is in the way of my whiteboard. There we go. Let me pin myself again so you can see this big. All right, so what you've got is you've got a layer like this, right? And then you've got your extra wall tucked away in there. So at this point, it's just a traditional step bezel, but you've added half round, it looks like, prongs on either side.
Yes.
Okay, so the challenge, if you're counting on this to get pushed down over the stone, is that these 2 points are going to be really hard to push down because they've got prong in the way, right? So one thing you could do is before you solder on your prongs, just cut down to the seat, just cut a little notch. So if I were looking at this section straight on before I put the prong on, it would look like that. Right?
Okay, so where the prong is right here,
Yep.
cut in.
Yep. Before you put the prong on, before you solder it, so that what you're doing is you're soldering your prong up to that, and you could even notch. So if your half round prong is like this and you notch it a tiny bit so that it's resting and it just becomes part of the wall, then
But it's
then
already
it's gonna
soldered.
fold down easier.
It's already soldered on.
Oh, yeah, I'm not telling you to fix this one. I think this is gonna
Oh.
work just fine as you've got it. What I'm telling you is that when you go to set it, you're gonna see some challenges right at the point where the two prongs are, because all the rest of the wall is thin and is gonna
Thinner.
push over, but now your prongs are gonna fight and try to keep it at whatever the angle of the prongs, right? So you may even need to do a little, either with a file or with that heart burr right at the top of where the prong meets the wall and carve in so that you can fold your prong even further at that angle. Right? That'll probably overcome the resistance you're going to see with the extra thickness of the material there.
Okay.
Make
I'm
sense?
glad I waited. because
Yeah,
I
that's
was-
cool. That's a super neat combination of 3 different settings that we've learned. That's amazing.
Thank
It's a
you.
great ring.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else have something to show off?
No,
Okay.
but I promise next time I will have something finished.
Nice. I'm on like hour 60 of my current project, so I'm with you.
I saw your project online. You posted a picture, right?
I did.
That looks
It's-
like a museum piece. How many hours have you put in that?
About 60. It's about 60.
Wow.
It's a combination of the challenges of the hinges and the challenges of the hollow forms. And then the clasp was a little bit of a pain in the butt because it was not a traditional put together for a box clasp.
I hope you enter it somewhere because to me it looks like a museum piece.
Well, it is it's taking the place of my prior hollow forms centerpiece for the collection. So I'm hoping it'll get a little attention. I've tried applying to various shows with the last one and got resoundingly rejected. But it'll be out for display at craft shows when I'm traveling.
Good. That's good.
Mhm, mhm.
The
Yeah, it's a
next
fabulous
section,
piece.
pardon?
Fabulous piece.
I hope
said
it's going
a
to come out.
fabulous piece.
I
It
hope.
is.
I'll be
I-
learning some of that, right?
At the
Some of that
hollow forms
hollow
class,
form?
yes, we are absolutely covering lots of what's going on in that. The clasps class will cover making clasps for it, so we don't get to that. There's plenty of other material to learn in the hollow forms class.
Yeah.
The hollow forms class is great.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
fun.
Cool.
All right, so next session is February 15th. We will be doing the stitch setting that we just showed the practice for, and we will also probably get to the bead setting. One of the nice things about this next chapter is the doing is the setting pretty much. So there's no soldering in these exercises, and really this is just about how do we get the stones attached. If we get through those quickly, we might start the star setting. By the time we get to the star setting, we need to have all 3 gravers handled and ground and polished. So if you want to play along at home, you'll need to do that. But if we don't get that far, it'll go into the next session. And then basically one session after that, we'll finish this chapter and move into chapter 6. So it'll go quick from here. I think that's it. Yeah, you've got until tomorrow morning if you want to use that coupon for any registrations. And you're welcome to pass that code on to other friends if you know people that want to take the class too, that maybe haven't been following along on the project.
And when do we let you know if there's something that we would like to have it done over or
Done over, you can post it on the post I put up in the Facebook group if you can find it, or if you're not on the Facebook group, you can let me know.
No, I think I am. I will look for it.
Okay, all I'm looking for is, I think it'll be sort of the wind down when we do what did we learn this year and a half? And I'll be looking at things that I felt I didn't get enough out of my exercise on it or share enough that I need to set myself up to make a fool of myself again on camera for those same settings. So
So I
Then
have a
you know,
question.
not us.
I have a question. Someone wanted to take your class, but she wanted me to give her the password, and I told her to contact you. How do you feel about that?
do you mean the code for the 15% off?
No, for this class, this Zoom class.
Oh, it's not going to do any good. You have to register separately. She has to just register, and it's free. This is free. Just tell her she has to go to my website and register for the 2 Zooms. So there's
Yes,
no
That's
password.
what I told her, just
other
to
than-
register.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I
Yeah.
didn't give it to her, because I'm like, no.
Okay. Yeah, this is a freebie, so this isn't, you're not sharing any super secrets by letting people in on this. It's just that Zoom will only let 1 person per registrant, I believe. I don't think, maybe you can use it twice. They'd show up under your name if they zoomed in on the exact same link that you use.
Okay.
So
Okay. And then
yeah.
the last question is, I noticed you had a T. You solder a T?
Yes,
that-
oh, the prep, I zipped through that. This is what we're going to be using for practicing our star setting and our bead setting.
So we should have it like that, soldered
So
like that.
if you have a vise or either a regular vise or a ball vise, just a setting vise, this will be super helpful when we get to those settings, because we're just going to pop it in there, tighten it down, and that'll give us the mobility that we want and the angles that we want while keeping
Okay.
it solid. Because for all our graver settings, we do not want our material moving. For the stitch setting, it's that little block of wood or something that's going to stop it from scooting forward. I
Right.
suppose you could probably make one of these for the stitch setting practice too, but we don't want the ball moving for stitch setting because we're trying to go very specifically forward and back. And really, this is only good for practice.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you'll have to cut it and file it off of your project when you're done.
Mhm.
So it's really just an easy way to set up that plate. And then again, the gridding, let me show that on the small camera. I mean, on the close up. The grid marks that I made across it.
So what size was that and what gauge?
So this is at least 16 gauge. It can be thicker. And it depends on your stones is the real answer. Because you're like, I'm going to be working with, I think I have 2.5 millimeter. What do I have? 3 millimeter. I have 3 millimeter stones because we don't want them poking through the back considerably. You know, for practice, it's not a big deal, but for when you do the final work, you're going to want something thick enough that you have room, because we're set for those 2, we're setting faceted stones down into the metal. Right?
Okay, so the lines you made are 3 millimeters and then you made
No.
X's?
No, sorry. The stones I made, the stones I'm choosing for this are 3 millimeters.
Okay,
What I'm doing is just spacing out with plenty of room on all sides. So I think I did these either 6 or 8 millimeter squares. And then I'm just going to center in here. So this is just, again, think of it like if you were like me and you grew up learning embroidery stitches and did a little sampler. We're just doing a sampler plate that we can set our stones into one after the other so we can see our progress. Because your first couple at least are going to look really ragged. And then you'll see the improvement in the beads that you make. The other thing that you'll need by the time we get to the bead setting is bead setting tools, which I should bring those out so you guys can see if you don't have those. Where are my bead setting? Somewhere I have my bead setters, but I may have packed them away. I have to have them for next session either way.
I have mine.
You have some with you? Yeah, they basically look like smooth cup burrs. Yeah. So we're going to need those for this next exercise. Bye, Sonia. Because for next session, because we're going to do the bead setting as part of that. And so that's taking those stitches that we make and balling them up, basically.
Where would be the best place to get that besides Rio?
You may actually find it at like a Harbor Freight or something, but you can also even make them out of old burrs. If you have dead cup burrs, you can grind them down and polish them. But that's a lot of work to get all the different sizes. So any of the major suppliers, and get the cheapo version of them, because you're not going to be setting unless you decide you fall madly in love with bead setting, in which case you'll spend money on a high quality set. But all you really need is something that has the slight sharpness and slight curvature that's been polished to really do the scrunching down. Okay. Yeah, I spent whatever, like $25 on my set because I knew I wasn't going to do a whole heck of a lot of bead setting.
Okay.
Okie doke. oops, I'm thinking I'm staring at you in person and I'm just showing you my little bench there. Any other last minute questions or preparation for upcoming stuff? Home stretch. I'm kind of excited. This has been really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, gang, have a good night.
Thank you.
too.
Great
Bye.
class. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rachel.